1970 witnessed a fountain burst of new talent on the UK music scene. And so many bands were putting out great debuts, and some of them fantastic sophomoric releases, including Genesis, who grew in leaps and bounds that year from their first album with the release Trespass, and from that album, the rip roaring album closing epic, The Knife. Already, the most Hammond intense track in their catalog. The one track that you could say indicated that they could have gone more in the direction of Uriah Heep and Deep Purple, perhaps. Okay, Deep Purple may be a bit of a stretch, but Uriah Heep, definitely. I would say this represents Peter Gabriel's darker vision at the time. And I really must appreciate just how vicious Anthony Phillips is sounding here. This is very out of character for him and not something he would really revisit any time afterwards or hadn't really done elsewhere on this album, as a matter of fact. Notice how we went from like a minor tonality at the beginning, na 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 na, like G minor. Now we've gone up half a step into a major tonality. Now we're in A flat. It's amazing how, and yet the underlying like motif, the sequence dun 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 dun, dun and the cadence is exactly the same. They've just shifted it up from half a step minor to major. That right there displays some real compositional sophistication on the part of Tony Banks and the others. It shows an intimate familiarity with tonality scales that you didn't really hear in bands much in the 60s, really. These are new developments, and Genesis are at the forefront of them. New developments for rock, for songwriting among rock bands, and Genesis are helping to lead the way. Notice how frantic Anthony, or Ant as he was nicknamed around this time, is just moving up and down the scales. And I also have to give props to the drumming of John Mayhew, who had during the opening bars managed to work out a very unique cadence to complement the piece. And we know that the lyrics deal with a despotic ruler who is sending his armies of men to their death to fight to expansionism. But let's see, the lyrics we've heard so far. Tell me my life is about to begin. Tell me that I'm a hero. Promise me all of your violent dreams. Light up my body with anger now. In this ugly world, it is time to destroy all this evil. Now, when I give a word, get ready to fight for your freedom now. The first few lines are rather obtuse. It's like, tell me my life is about to begin. Does that mean that his life will truly begin once people have died achieving this cause that he seeks? Tell me that I'm a hero. So he's going to become a hero because other people are going to go and shed blood in his name. Promise me all of your violent. You know, that line, tell me that I'm a hero, because we know that he's not the one out going out on the front lines. He's sending other people out. He's sending men, you know, I guess by the thousands, I would imagine. But that line has me thinking the absurdity of when leaders of nations are deemed heroes because they won a war or something, when it was thousands upon thousands of men who went out there on the front lines and died in for the cause, while the politicians, to them it was just like a video game. They weren't the ones, you know, risking their lives. They weren't the ones, you know, who had their sons out. So, and yet, all those deaths, all the casualties, that's just a statistic. That's just some number, like, you know, 52,000 or whatever. But the leader of the nation is often deemed the hero in I don't know, in the minds of voters or whatever, who are just looking to rationalize things in the best way they can. Yeah. Some of you are going to die. I've got to say that Gabriel's vocal cadences, even if you know the lyrics, you would really have to practice singing a lot. You would have to not only internalize the lyrics, you have to internalize the cadence and study the way he's singing and sing. It's like I'm still getting lost because the pace at which he's singing just throws me. He has a feel for these bars and this whole rhythmic structure that's all his own. And the real frenetic way that he sings is really outside of its time for 1970, which tended to be 1970 vocals tended to run the gamut from like the lighter like folk rock and the kind of mellow hippie side to the more bluesy hard rock wailing of like Ian Gillan, who was raising the bar for hard rock vocalists. And funny enough, in 1970 there were a lot of singers that were kind of flailing vocally. You have a lot of albums from that year where the music will be interesting. You know, it'll be kind of long-winded at times, but there'll be a lot of like musical development stretching out. You can tell that they're trying new ideas, and the vocalist will be going into this like operatic tenor wailing. I do believe kind of under pressure from the recent output, the recent lead taken on the music scene by the likes of Robert Plant, Ian Gillan, and to some degree Roger Daltrey, who and the way that he had developed. But so many of these vocalists came from like the Peter Noon, Freddie Garrity type school, that really thin, nasally, mid-60s beat vein, and hearing them try to sound all like like brawny like that and just wailing. Oh, Joe Cocker was another influence, you know, that kind of let it all hang out approach that was very new for white vocalists, you know, borrowed from like the blues, the American, you know, Chicago blues, the Delta blues, and soul singers. But this, what Peter Gabriel is doing, I can't really compare to anyone off the top of my head. It's like frenetic staccato. It's like a precursor to punk and post-punk, really. Hamill was also kind of had more that howl, like frenetic quality. Although for Genesis and Gabriel, it really is just this track. He doesn't do this on any other track, but later on, it's quite telling though that later on he would synchronize with the post-punk aesthetic, like starting kind of with his second album, and then with his third album, The Melting Face, he became a full-fledged post-punk musician, and there was also a bit of that post-punk prescience in the track I Know What I Like in Your Wardrobe. It's got that slow, ominous, fuzzy synth, and I can hear elements that sound like they would be picked up on parts of like The Melting Face, or like tracks like Exposure, like kind of like his first foray into that vein. Yeah, it's really telling, the musical developments of the later '70s. It's almost as if guys like Peter Gabriel and Peter Hamill were just waiting for them to come along. They already kind of had those ideas, those in their system already, in an era back in 1970, an era when by and large those kinds of musical concepts just didn't exist. Stand up and fight, for you know we are right. We must strike at the lies that have spread like disease to our minds. Soon we'll have power, every soldier will rest, and we spread out our kindness to all and what love now deserves. Some of you are going to die. Martyrs of course for freedom, and I shall provide. I gotta say, these lyrics are really. God, imagine doing karaoke to a song like this, and like facing the audience as you sing some of these. This is very, very. I would say the most despotic lyrics I've ever heard. Stand up and fight, for you know we are right. We must strike at the lies that have spread like disease through our minds. This is definitely about a dictator who has people convinced, has the masses convinced that his vision, is, will lead, that once, untold numbers of people have sacrificed for this utopian vision that future generations will experience. It's Stalin, Hitler, people like that. Soon we'll have power, every soldier will rest, and we'll spread out our kindness to all who our love now deserve. Yeah, it's basically about killing and dying in the name of love and kindness. Some of you are going to die, martyrs, of course, to the freedom that I shall provide. And he says it with such demonic, tone. I'll give you. Oh, okay. And here it gets even more just sinister and cruel and evil. I'll give you the names of those you must kill. All must die with their children. Carry their heads to the palace of old. Hang them high. Let the blood flow. Yeah, the whole notion that that the children are of the evil, or are a product of the evil, and that they'll grow up, and I guess it's kind of like the reason why the Bolsheviks murdered the children of the Tsar family. It's like, why did they have to kill the little children? Is a common question. Well, yeah. They thought that those kids would just grow up with that same sense of Tsarist entitlement or whatever, or them merely being alive. I guess, of course, the primary reason why they killed that family is because it was believed that Tsar loyalists would still be somewhat mobilized, as long as that family was still alive. But if the loyalists were to know that that family was dead, then they would just cease and surrender. get behind the October Revolution. Um, Now in this ugly world, break all the chains around us. Now the crusade has begun. Give us a land fit for heroes now. Yeah. Yeah, Anthony Phillips really showing a different side of himself, a side that he would never show again. And he has developed as a guitarist since From Genesis to Revelation. Um, and Tony Banks showing a side of himself that he never really showed elsewhere. Return of the Giant Hogweed kind of had some of this element, not quite the same, but similar. I guess that was like the only other track in their catalog that could remotely be considered a hard rock number. But it's interesting, like to think. How do you think? How do you think? Leave a comment. How do you think Genesis, the legacy and the catalog would have unfolded? How long do you think the band would have lasted had they followed this vein and ultimately become more associated with the likes of Uriah Heep and Deep Purple than if they had instead basically avoided this type of music beyond this track? And doing what they ultimately did was following the direction more of like Visions of Angels and Stagnation. Um, yeah, yeah. Do you think they could have had quite the career they did if they had gone the hard rock route? I like how we've got Tony Banks playing like the theme here on one set of notes, and then Anthony Phillips is doing like thirds. Like he's matching what Banks is playing, yet he's doing like thirds. And I also loved that call and response that preceded this, that kind of jerky, like couple of bars. Yeah, John Mayhew is quite a drummer. I'm wondering what he did beyond this band, if anything. He has some really big percussive sounds that just give the largeness and epic quality that this track calls for. John Mayhew didn't really do anything beyond this album, unfortunately. He's quite passed away in 2009. Huh. Yeah, unfortunately, he seems like he has. I hear a guy with quite a bit of potential. You know, all the credits on Discogs are just Genesis related. He only played on this album. He left right after it was recorded, and then Phil Collins joined in the summer of 1970, and I guess toured with this material. Mm. I imagine that this section is supposed to convey a kind of like quiet scene of carnage, of post carnage, with just a bunch of dead bodies decomposing, like on a at the scene of where a battle had occurred, maybe hours earlier. Interestingly, this wouldn't be the last track that Genesis sang that dealt with battle or dealt with legions of men going out to fight, you know, for at the command of one man. They also deal with that topic in One for the Vine. I like Gabriel's flute work here. It's going into that kind of fluty, solid, it's almost creating kind of like ambient, like textures over Mike Rutherford's fuzzy bass line, kind of martial precision that Rutherford is laying down. And the sustained organ tones of Banks really have like an ominous, smoky quality to them. Kind of quiet, but just filling out the space. And this is almost like meant to synchronize with some scene in a movie. I I imagine they must have had a movie in their mind, like a war epic in their mind as they were piecing this together. Great interplay here between Rutherford and Phillips. Rutherford doing that boom, 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 kind of fuzzy, and then Ant playing like these scaling notes around it, they're just like kind of going right at it, duking it out. Ant is really exploring like the tonal range of the key center presented here. I mean, in a way that rock guitarists hadn't been doing just a couple of years before. This is very new, and and each note matters. It's got he's not just noodling for the sake of it. It's like each note he play like part he plays is memorable. It's something that you could like recreate live. It's got thematic substance to it. Hear John Mayhew just rip it up amid all this. Just all those fills, all those rolls that he's putting in there. Now, this is different from the theme that we were hearing at the beginning, yet it's similar and it just feels like it's part of the same track. I mean, the cohesion is amazing considering how many ideas that we've managed to. I guess there's just something similar about the cadences. There's a certain line through where it's not just random parts like song or like riffs being sewn together to create an 8-minute song. There's something similar. It's almost like this is kind of like a variation of the theme that we were hearing at the beginning, except now it has more of there's more of a finality to what we're hearing now, because like the consequences of what he was singing about earlier have played out in the song. Brisk open cadences. Notice how we went from those really dark, sinister, like minor chords. We were in just like minor keys forever, and now we've gone back to like major modality. And of course, we had been in like all those like closed cadences and all those like fits and starts that we were hearing, and now we're just kind of like breezing along open cadence, major. I believe maybe what we're hearing now is supposed to represent the glee of the dictator now that his wishes have been carried out. So he's happy, even if a lot of people have lost their lives for his, vision. Genesis, The Knife, the epic album closer on Trespass, their sophomoric album released in 1970. The final album with Anthony Phillips, who shows a very just sinister, beautiful, glorious side of himself that he would never show again, because he tended to focus more on the softer, more lighter end of things. Let's see. On jazzrocksoul.com, the entry for Trespass says, Trespass is the second album by English five-piece Genesis, released in 1970 on Charisma. Recorded 2 years after their debut, the album witnesses the band's leap into multi-movement song form, an approach carried most elaborately through the slow, shifting development of stagnation and across the roaring, flaming intensity of The Knife. Elsewhere, the emotional tenderness of Visions of Angels and the pained cries of White Mountain display the aesthetic contrast between the romantic leanings of guitarist Anthony Phillips and the existential curiosity of vocalist Peter Gabriel. Arrangement-wise, the album is notable for the band's newly minted Spectrum guitar style, which Phillips developed for these sessions in collaboration with bassist Mike Rutherford. Though the guitarist departed Genesis following this album's release, the band continued to use his layered 12-string style across their following 6 albums. And on this album, let's see, Anthony Phillips played 12-string acoustic guitar, lead guitar, dulcimer, and harmonies. Dulcimer, interesting. Anthony Banks played organ, piano, mellotron, guitar. Mike Rutherford, 12-string acoustic guitar, electric guitar, classical guitar, cello, and harmonies. 12-string, but not the 12-string bass that he supposedly played on From Genesis to Revelation. I'm still curious about that, or whether that was a typo. There are certain issues. Some of the many different issues of that first album that have come out over the years. Some of them have said 12-string bass. I just can't imagine just all the feedback and reverb an instrument like that would create. And of course, Peter Gabriel, vocals, flute, accordion, tambourine, bass drum. Yeah, we've seen that before. John Mayhew, drums, percussion, harmonies. Produced by John Anthony. Yeah, great album. I love their first album, as a pop psych album in the vein of like Forever Amber, or like kind of like or kind of like Nirvana, or some of the poppier side of the Moody Blues. But this is just growing. This was like a quantum leap in musical development for them, and in a lot of ways, I like it better than Nursery Crime. Over the years, I've come to like this one a bit better. I just think the material overall is a bit tighter from front to back. The closest, and once to recap, the closest that Genesis would ever come to this track would be Return of the Giant Hogweed on the next album, and the acoustic layered style would be played by Steve Hackett. And by Mike Rutherford as late as, or perhaps more by Mike Rutherford, as late as like Entangled off Trick of the Tail. Anyway, for more Rubies and Sapphires from the catalog from this album and the other albums by Genesis, see the directory of albums by English G artists linked in the description below. Like and subscribe and follow me on social media, and leave a comment about any observations you have about this song, things I may have missed, counterpoints or anything, about the lyrics, about the music. And until next time, this is Zaragon, the world's most ear-traveled trimaximalist, signing off.